Welcome to the FMCG Guys podcast. I'm Daniel Torres. For those who are tuning in for the first time, this is a podcast about the retail and consumer industries. We speak with top voices in this space bi-weekly. So first of all, we wanted to give a shout out to the ones that have listened to us before, our 11,000 plus LinkedIn followers. And you can now also find us on Instagram. So we'll leave the link on the digital show notes so you can follow us there as well for the same content that you'll find on LinkedIn, but some special behind the scenes stuff that we'll start producing from now, actually. So today I'm accompanied by a very special person, no other than my co-host, Efrain Rosario. Hi, Efrain, how are you?
Good. I like I like being thought of as a very special person. So
you look surprised when I said a special person.
Yeah, I was like looking around. Who else is here?
So it's you, of course. And talking about you today, we're going to speak about beauty. So tell me.
No. I was just going to say, I think this is a space that both of us are probably less familiar with, but I think it's one from a general business standpoint has been a really interesting space to watch over the years.
Absolutely, because you have like the big players that we all know about, but for the last maybe 7-8 years, there's been a lot of conversation of up and coming beauty brands, like a lot of them that come through new routes to market, like TikTok, for example. I remember there was a very fashionable term maybe 6 years ago that was indie beauty brands, which you still hear every now and then, but that's not so prominent, right?
No, I think so. I mean, I definitely heard of them. And I think that, to your point, I think what's happened is a lot of them have actually been acquired by some of those bigger players. But I think in addition to that, beauty care has always been a space that I've always been curious to watch, just because a lot of the big players are also doing a lot of really interesting stuff from an innovation and tech and digital standpoint as well. So I think that, our guest today is somebody who's really, really keen in to that space, and it's great to have her on.
Yeah, because she's been on both sides of the table. So she has a history of working with the big names in the personal care and beauty space, like Unilever and Revlon. And today, our guest, Oshiya Savur, he's the CMO at the PE-backed brand incubator in beauty, Maesa. So with her, we want to understand not only her amazing background, but also what it's like to do marketing when you're not working with the big guys and you're working with smaller up and coming brands. What are the levers that you can pull there? What are the advantages and the pros and cons? And more generally, what's the state of the beauty sector right now?
Oshiya Savur, Maesa, a Bain Capital Company Chief Brand Officer.
Thanks for joining us, Oshiya. It's great to have you here so that the audience gets a bit acquainted with you. And obviously, we'll leave your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. Maybe you can tell us a bit about your career background, how you got to be Chief Brand Officer at Maesa.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a long story. It could be 40 minutes, but I'll spare the details. So just fast forwarding the first part of my career, I guess. I grew up in India. I studied in India. I started my first role at Hindustan Unilever, which is a huge CPG company. It's the same as Unilever in the rest of the world. They're just iconic in the country because they were there 75 years ago and so on. So we're really part of the fabric of the country and the culture, and many iconic brands. So it was a real pleasure to start my career there. With them, I moved to Singapore in a regional role, and then met my now husband in Singapore. He was an expat there as well, and he's Indian American. We both decided to move here back to the country. So I would say my formative years of career, post-MBA and in CPG, were actually built here in America.
In 5 years, you worked in 3 different locations and very different, India, Singapore, and the US, right?
Yeah, thanks for calling that out. Yes, for sure. I started my career in India. I lived in Istanbul for a bit.
Oh, so add one more to that, Daniel.
Yes, it was just such a beautiful experience. Then I was in Bangkok. Thankfully for me, the regional office, well, I was supposed to start in Singapore, but the office had not moved yet. So their office was in Bangkok when I started. So I got a good 6 months in Bangkok, then in Singapore, and then I moved to the US. So thank you for, yes, filling the blanks there. But yes, those just 5 countries. It was a really, really great experience. And it's such a melting pot of cultures, and when you also live in Singapore, you touch so many regions because you're in a regional capacity. So traveling to Vietnam and to Philippines and to Indonesia and to draw out the insights and stuff like that in and of itself is a chapter. Would love to talk about it someday. But yeah, so I think coming back to the career in the US, I think for me, what sort of defines my journey coming into Mesa was this whole notion of not sticking into one swim lane. So when I moved to the US, I found that there was a very specific way career was developed in the US. You were thrown into a swim lane and then you became an expert of that specific skill that you were acquiring. So if, say, you were in brand development and your job was to create brands or innovation, you then spent years doing that and became a real expert in it. Or versus the other side, or you've been on marketing operations side, and that's what you do, which is that you plan go to market. For me, just either swim lane just felt incomplete, and I really wanted to make sure that I was acquiring skill sets on both sides of it. So my whole career, I think, was sort of designed with that in mind. I pushed myself to jump out of my swim lanes and to go into different swim lanes all at once. So I feel like over the last 15 years or so, or 13-ish, proudly able to have done it. It wasn't easy. Every time you switched to swim lane, there was a lot of questions whether you could do the job of the other swim lane you were trying to enter. And it always took somebody taking a bet on you and you then working really hard to make sure that that bet never proved wrong. So now at this point in time, I've worked at large enterprises, medium-sized enterprises, small enterprises across CPG and personal care and beauty. I've touched every category, including fragrances, cosmetics, body, skin, hair, you name it, and across all kinds of skill sets, right? Like innovation, incubation, whether that is market operations, media, e-com, etc. So I think that is sort of the career journey that has led me to Mesa. And Mesa, just as we get into it, is an incubator. And what we do is we build brands for a living. And it's just, again, such a conglomerate with amazing all categories, all functions all at once. But I won't jump into it just yet, but it feels like a nice climax to everything that I accomplished so far.
Well, I was just about to say, Osha, I think it's like, it actually feels like the perfect place for you because of the fact that you have worked across so many of these swim lanes that you get to be able to, one thing, and you and I both know, from working at startups is you have to be scrappy and you have to wear many hats. So I'm assuming that's probably served you quite well at Mesa.
Yes, I love it here. So to give you a bit of a background on this, so Mesa is actually fairly large for its operations. We're the #1 incubator in mass globally. And as I mentioned, we create brands for a living. And now we have actually a portfolio of brands that are extremely successful that launched no more than 5 or 6 years ago. And we continue to bring in new brands, and we're the company you would look to if you are looking to innovate and disrupt, as we call the sleepy giant CPG categories, right? So we play in all different categories. We have fragrance portfolio, hair, skincare, color cosmetics, and much more that we are brewing right now as well. So from a category perspective, it is really, really rewarding. You get to work in all categories at once.
Going through digital transformation is hard and expensive. ChatGPT-like solutions automate and speed up almost everything. AI will replace all of our jobs soon. Are these statements all true, or just the newest myths? Meet the SoftServe Business Systems team. SoftServe Business Systems have been helping FMCG businesses worldwide to find the truth in a complicated tech environment for over 20 years now. By applying an exclusive digital transformation framework and offering a single, fully integrated AI-driven ecosystem of solutions, they know precisely what, when, and how to make technologies benefit your business. SoftServe Business Systems, mythbusters of the FMCG world.
No, it's really interesting. And actually, your role specifically as Chief Brand Officer, I'm assuming, like you said, it sounds like you may have a responsibility for both, like you said, birthing new brands or like bringing them into the world. But also, it sounds like now that you've got this portfolio of brands that still exists, is like you also have to manage through the nurture and growth phases of those brands as well.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely spot on. It is a huge role in that it covers both the incubation and innovation side of it, along with the creative studio, and then also the other side of it, which is once the brand or the product is birthed, how do you bring it to market, right, and have it be successful? So all of the brand marketing initiatives, all of the integrated marketing initiatives, which is press, influencer, and social, along with marketing operations, because the larger the company gets, the more organized you kind of have to start getting. Even though you operate with a very scrappy mindset, you still need processes that do make sense and give it a bit of a structure. So there is all of that as well, that as we are growing extremely fast, how do we keep up with our own growth and make sure that there is some structure that we're starting to infuse in the organization? So a lot of change management and a lot of just culture building overall as well.
Yeah, you bet. And how does it change to like lead marketing when, you're managing, as you've done before, a very established brand? Like look at the portfolio and at Unilever, look at the Revlon portfolios. You have these brands with a great history, great legacy, to being basically in the driver's seat of the brand in terms of or very new brands or creating a brand from scratch. Like how different or similar is it as a marketer and as a leader at the same time?
I'm a big believer of saying that the fundamentals don't quite change. It's the scale and how you sort of operate things changes quite significantly. And I do think that there's a huge difference in the two sides of operations. And which is why, like, sometimes when large enterprise people are trying to move into smaller enterprise, there's a lot of fear around that, because smaller enterprise people think that the large enterprise people won't be able to be scrappy. Just the other way around, and the small enterprise people are trying to come to the large enterprise people. They're like, oh, will they be able to manage the process and the systems and what that comes with it, right? So there is both sides of it, which is very specific. But in terms of brand fundamentals, the fact that you need a well-defined brand, the fact that you need to be solving an unmet consumer need, the fact that you need to find relevant ways of going to market. None of that changes, it's just the scale of it that changes, and how you go to market changes, right? So for instance, in a large enterprise, like a Unilever or a Revlon, every step you take, right, it is scrutinized because the stakes are so high. Everything you do will cost millions of dollars because it has to, because for you to achieve the scale, to move the needle on your market share, will require millions of dollars. Therefore, every step you take has to go through some sort of rigor for it to be the right step, right? So I remember when I started my career, sometimes a whole year would just go by in making one strong TV commercial. And looking back, I understand why it took so long, because it had to be absolutely perfect, because tens of millions of dollars were going to be put behind that asset. So that asset better be something that actually will drive purchase intent and branding, right? Because if it was missing on either one, it's not worth spending tens of millions of dollars on it, right? So I think the stakes are a lot higher. So therefore, everything kind of sort of by design moves a bit slower, because there's a lot of stakeholders that everything has to kind of go through. When you're a smaller enterprise, while stakes are high for your own small base, they're not as high as they are for a larger enterprise. You don't have to do so much research. You kind of just learn by doing. You drop an NPD, you drop an NPD, you drop an NPD, and chances are you'll succeed. The more you do it, the better it gets. For content, you just churn out a ton of content. Again, it's iterative. You learn by doing. Versus in my other worlds, learning was happening with a lot of stakeholders who had a lot of built-in gut reactions now, right? So there was a lot of earned knowledge in the senior leadership, right? There was a lot of market research that needed to go into it. There was a lot of rigor that needed to go into it. There is part of that even here. But you see that the pace at which you can move and learn by doing, because failure is okay, because not every mistake is tens of millions of dollars riding on it.
Yeah. How do you, like as a leader as well, and somebody that has an organization under you, how do you hire the right people, like best in class people with best practices, but to still have this quote unquote scrappy mindset?
It is very hard. I would say it's not easy at all. And what I have started to call is that it's a unicorn, right? When you land a unicorn, you've hit a gold mine because this person will survive anywhere. To the large enterprise, they will bring a very innovative mindset and will become entrepreneur, right? To a small organization, they bring structure. So as small organizations grow extremely fast, they know what good looks like in terms of processes, so they can bring some of that, right? But it's not easy to find it. I generally look for people who may have already switched, but I also remember when I was the one who was looking to switch, it was so hard to convert people to believing that I could do it, right? So part of me also wants to be the person who gives people a chance and be the person who took a bet. But that bet, of course, is inherent with risk, right? You're taking that bet and you want to make sure that the person you're taking the bet on are grateful for that bet and are actually going to work hard to make sure that it was well worth its while, you know. So I think it's at the end of the day boils down to the good old human instinct and whether you think the person will thrive or not. But resume wise, it's hard. It's very hard.
Well, and I imagine too, like some of the other skills you've mentioned, part of it comes with experience, right? In terms like, after you've been through a couple of those hiring situations, you hopefully build that muscle and you can kind of, almost build like an instinct, if you will, for being able to find, maybe it's not the unicorn, but it's somebody who may have one of the two, but has the
ability to learn the
building
other.
exactly is open to and can build that other skill set.
I think attitude is just so critical in this. And I'll tell you, sometimes in your interview process, you think that this particular person you're hiring will be able to manage the complexity, right? And will be able to manage the chaos and sort of building the plane while flying it situation, right? But they start coming in and they talk the talk and they come in and they disintegrate because it's just all at once. It's like everything happening all at once at the same time. It's kind of like that. You're growing and growth is addictive. Nobody's going to say slow down your growth because we're putting a process in place. No, grow at the pace you're growing. But while you're at it, just add some structure and process to it too, and change the organization and the cultural mindset at it too. So it is very hard to hire and recruit for it, and you don't always place the right bets, unfortunately.
Well, and it comes with the territory. It's just something that you have to just kind of accept in terms of like, if you're going to be in these kinds of situations, you have to be fairly agile and flexible when it comes to those kinds of things. So speaking of being flexible and agile, I think that you having had the amount of experience you've had in the beauty care industry, you've had a lot of exposure, actually probably more exposure than most people in this industry, to influencers. And you've been able to witness firsthand how important they've become as part of a brand building marketing mix. Can you give us a little bit of insight in regards to like how you've seen that practice or that tool evolve over time, given across the many brands you've worked on?
I think for me, the importance of influencer marketing is completely just flipped on its head. Like 10 years ago, it was something that was just a line item in your overall marketing operations, right? Even just a few years ago, I would have thought the same. But for me now, it's the number one thing. It's the number one thing because as consumers, we lead two lives now, the real life and then the social life that we live on our phones, right? Which so much research is like hours spent on the phone every day. And what are we doing on our phone? Either we're checking our work email or most of the times we're on social media, just flipping through TikTok and Instagram, right? And then as a brand, you're not present there. It's, to me, you're not marketing your brand, right? And the pace at which the content needs to be generated these days, it's impossible for a brand to do it all by themselves. So for me, the influencers sort of become an extension of the brand. And how you go to market, it's inevitable. It's kind of become almost the number one driver in my mind in a lot of ways. On the flip side of it, though, it isn't one that is very well measured still. I think you could have, dashboards that sort of measure the value of influencers. You then have your MMMs that measure the value of paid. You have dashboards that measure the value of your own channels. But I don't think that there are still good solutions out there that sort of look at all of it, right? Because my fundamental belief is that when you get the right scale and inflection point of influencers speaking about your brand, it actually improves the performance of your paid marketing as well. And actually just all both rise. But there isn't any way of proving that. There isn't any way of attributing that. So I think that it is still largely not measured properly, and the impact of it is not still very well known. But just having experienced it myself, the value and the importance of it, I have become a big believer of it. And I think that it's almost impossible to not have it as your number one, or if not number one, number two, number three sort of priority areas as a brand in this day and age.
Yeah, and then it's crazy, right? Like the world of influencers is not just you paying a big celebrity for an Instagram post. Like I know people that have less than 10,000 followers, they're like friends of friends and stuff like that, that are actually influencers. Like they get paid or they get free stuff to advertise brands.
Right.
It's interesting, right? How that works. And I know that this isn't something new. It's been talked about like micro influencers for the last at least 7 years, but it's an interesting dynamic, the whole thing. I mean, I don't know how you decide when you go for one or the other.
Yeah, no, I think for me it has to be all of it.
Yeah.
It has to be all of it. There isn't one or the other. And I think that is where a lot of people make mistakes too, is that they think that it's just this because that's what the press is buzzing about, or it's that, like I think if you build your marketing plans based on just what press is most interested about from a technology and marketing lever standpoint, your marketing strategies inevitably would be just incomplete, right? At the end of the day, it's the good old go back to this where the blank canvas and say, what are you trying to do? Who are you trying to attract? And therefore, what are the marketing levers you have and how much money you have, right? Like those some sort of like basic questions. And for me, just mathematically, right, like if you just focus on micro influencers, which is totally fair and fine, by the way, if that's your strategy, right, because I'm sure you've thought about it and you've decided that that's what you want to do. But just mathematically, for you to move the needle on your brand, no matter how small or large it is, right, just think about if these people have only 10,000 followers each, and each on average have only 3% engagement rate, right? And branded posts get even less engagement than just lifestyle posts, right? So say 1 to 2% of those 10,000 people will actually see the ad, right? Whatever the influencer is talking about. And once they've seen the ad, perhaps 10% of those people who actually saw the ad will want to take an action, go to a store to buy it, right? So you've come down to maybe just hundreds, if you're lucky, users, right? Like so the army of it that has to be built, just mathematically speaking, has to be just so large, right? So I think that's where you just have to do your math and say, what is the budget you have, right? What are the objectives you're trying to hit? And mathematically, what is the revenue goal you're trying to hit? And how does this whole thing fit together? And that's how you make some investment choices. But if you just go at it and you say, oh, you know what, micros is the way to go, let's go micros, and you do 100 micros, let me tell you, it's not going to do anything for your business. Don't do it.
Wow, interesting. Well, that's probably for a whole other podcast there, friend. We'll have to.
Yeah. I had like 3 questions already coming out of that conversation. So I'm like, I think we need to do a part 2 with those.
But staying in the digital territory, so obviously like the whole e-commerce, digital marketing part has had a huge impact on the business. But then you have like all the back end, like data, digitalization of sales process, AI. How have you seen that influencing specifically marketing, creativity, and innovation?
Yeah, I think for us personally, we have been doing a lot of experiments in generative AI space from a content perspective. I'm not able to share much of it right now, but in the next few weeks, we'll be announcing that. But I think I'm very excited about some of the experiments we've done and the quality of content we've generated. So more to come there. I think on creativity and innovation, to me, generative AI is a help that you can have. It's not a replacement of human ingenuity, right? Because the thing is that if all of us are using the same prompts and asking the internet to create solutions for us, at some point in time, it all just will become the sea of sameness. And all of us are having the same ideas and all of us are launching the same ideas. And where is the differentiation, right? So again, just going back to the fundamentals of relevance and differentiation, what's your USP, still has to be something that has gone through some sort of human intel. Now, of course, can it reduce the time you spent doing that? Yes, right? So it makes you more efficient, but it doesn't replace the human creativity. So I think In that it has helped, but it has not replaced, and I don't think that it will in any near term, or if it does, quite honestly, I find it fairly dangerous, right? Like, again, just talking about uniqueness of a brand and what you bring to the world and the relevance of it, I think does get questioned and challenged. As it relates to processes and the back end and so on, I would like to say that I have seen that a lot has changed, but I find that there is always the pace at which we speak of it compared to the pace at which it gets adopted in organizations. There's a wide gap, right? We speak of digital transformation. We've been speaking of it for years, right? And yet we find that a lot of the companies have not digitally transformed. And what does digital transformation mean? Digital transformation means that what can be delegated to technology, all your manual tasks have been delegated to technology and will be done with fair amount of accuracy. So therefore, you don't have to constantly recheck the work, right? That simple through line, I have not seen that happen. And I've been at many different sized companies at this point. It hasn't happened. In fact, that's the context of the podcast that we speak of. It's all about the failed digital transformations. And I don't think that it is where it needs to be. Where we think it should be, I don't think it's there.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on, right? In terms of digital transformation means so many different things to so many different people in regards to how they choose to, what it is that they need to do in terms of like actual transformation, right? It's like in some cases it is around becoming much more efficient and effective with regards to content creation and optimization. On another hand, it could be that you need to become much more savvy in terms of how you're thinking about your marketing operations and the analytics that go with it. So I find it to be the longer that it's been around and the longer that I've kind of experienced it, the more I find that it means so many different things to it means different things to different people. So it's really, really hard to pin down to just one. And I'll be curious to hear your announcement in a couple of weeks in terms of what you guys are doing with Gen AI, because I do think that, for all of the reasons you mentioned, it's a really interesting space, but the difference between what people say and what they do is always there.
Yes, it's so wide. I would say that media is probably the most advanced in taking care of, and have been advanced for a while, right? Like when you think about paid social marketing and how the lookalike audiences and how let the algorithm decide which content to pick, which target to go after, right, based on ROAS and all of that. That I would assume is also a function of artificial intelligence, right? And I think that is continuing to get sharper and sharper. And a lot of the teams who run media definitely end up being by default more tech savvy as well, because they're constantly running algorithms, their own bots to run, people who run media for Amazon sort of have that as well. So I think media in general, from an agency perspective, even from a client perspective, teams that work on search, for instance, or media, for instance, probably have the most application for it. And it's very visible what they're doing. But I think from a data management standpoint, content management standpoint, even, I feel the adoption is a lot less than you would imagine in the real side.
Absolutely. So I want to switch gears a little bit and go back to one of the other swim lanes that you've been on. And I want to ask you about innovation. And I'm curious to hear from you. And I know this is a hard question because it's almost like picking your favorite child in a way. But what has been that one brand innovation that's stuck with you, has been one of your favorites? And why is that?
Yeah, it's so funny you call it picking between your children, because it is truly that. I kind of was thinking about it and I was like, oh, it's hard, right? And especially when you call them your children, then it's like gets extra hard. So in just building on that analogy, I guess I would go back to my very first NPD that I launched here when I moved to the US. And quite honestly, that was my first just ever, because when I came out of business school and I lived in Singapore and Bangkok, a lot of the work that I was doing was on the communication side. So we were on the brand management side, but the projects and objectives that we had was very different. We were trying to centralize the TV commercials, et cetera, across 3 different regions for value brands. So it was a very different, very comms heavy sort of role. And while there was NPD, but never sort of like a big NPD in the way that my first NPD in the US was. So going back to my years when I was a brand manager on Suave and Suave hair care. At the time, I remember we had done a focus group, and in one of the focus groups, somebody said, "Oh yeah, Suave is the shampoo I use on my dogs." And we were all sitting
Sorry, can you tell us a bit about Suave, exactly what it is?
Yeah. It's a value brand in the US. It's one of those brands that have existed for decades. I forget, I don't know anymore how long, but safe to say over 50 years. Like, it's one of those brands that has lived and it's part of the fabric of America. It's back when I was there, it was over $1 billion as a master brand and existed in all different categories. We had body care, deodorant, body cleansing, and then also, of course, hair care. Hair care was the largest part of the portfolio at the time. And we had different tiers within it, and it was sort of like a family brand. We had the men's line, we had the kids line, we had the women's line. So I was the brand manager on the women's line. And back in the day when you did focus groups, you sat in those dark rooms in the back, and you'd have people come in and speak, right? And so in one of those moments, when somebody said that, "Oh yeah, Suave's a shampoo I use on my dogs," and all of us were like, "What?" Like, that is our hair care that's meant for women. It's getting used on dogs. So there's really an equity issue here. We've got to fix it. So in that, we kind of were bold, and we sort of decided that the role of Suave was to democratize salon beauty, i.e. the gold standard of beauty, because we were a value brand and our job was to democratize, because our woman knew that you don't have to spend $1 million to look like $1 million. And, so that was our target audience and her mindset. So we said, what is the gold standard happening right now in salon world that Suave could build and create for this consumer and sort of create a premium tier within it? Because creating a premium tier also just helped us from trading up the consumer, both from price point and then from a profit standpoint as well. So it made a lot of business sense for us to do. But from a consumer sense too, when your benchmark is suddenly $40 shampoo, a $3 shampoo compared to that feels like a huge value, even though it's $1 more than your existing offering. So with that said, we created a whole mix. It was a significantly improved version of what we were offering in the market today. It was a very different scent profile, a very different packaging. It's the golden line on Suave. If ever you're at a Walmart or Target, check it out. And keratin infusion treatments were the rage at the time. So we said, what if we created a wash and care line that democratized keratin infusion treatments? And so we did that, and it was a $3 price point. And sure enough, our consumer insight was just so spot on, because there was a real desire for it. It was a very expensive treatment. Most of people could not afford it. So bringing that out, that very trendy premium ingredient at a $3 price point, which again sort of became a big bet. If it was going to fly, then it was going to be super successful. If it didn't fly, it was not the end of the world. It was one of those things. And
people would be using the ingredient on the dogs as well.
They will not be, because it'll be $3, and it's at that point in time starts to get a bit expensive to do that.
Got it.
So, yes, no. So I think, and that when we launched, it took everyone by surprise. Like, we knew people who were working on it that it was going to be successful. We didn't realize how successful it was going to be. It became quickly the #1 NPD launched in hair care that year, and then thereafter, and that's like $48 million in revenue in just 1 year. And then we brought on many more infusion lines, and then it was all about, then came out Moroccan infusion, because the argan oil was such a rage at the time, and so on and so forth. So by the time I left, it had already become almost $200 million line within itself, and a huge help to gain market share during that time. And Unilever had just acquired Alberto Culver in that time. So in that year, for the first time ever, we had the #1 brand, which was Suave, #1 brand, #1 manufacturer, #1 NPD in the year. So it was a very, very exciting. And because it was my first, it's just always so close to my heart. And not to say, in the last 13 years, there hasn't been anything else to celebrate. There's been many more, but somehow this one's the closest, because it was my first, and it was just so successful. And yeah, it was exciting.
Yeah, and you guys were hitting on something that was that's still very relevant in today's world, right? Which is accessible luxury. You were just doing it 13 years ago, so you really were blazing new trails.
Mm-hmm. One would hope. Yes, thank you.
To create a $200 million product or category from nowhere, pretty impressive as well.
Yeah.
As your first innovation.
It was very, very exciting. I can't lie. It's still one of those that I could talk for hours about, and there's many more after that, but I just somehow always go back to this one.
Yeah. And tell us about your podcast. So I know that you started quite recently. I don't know if it was end of last year, beginning of this one, a podcast, right? Called The Tech. I don't know if I would say What the Tech.
What the Tech? Yeah, we just couldn't get the domain name. I wish that it was just What the Tech.
It can be understood. And I saw that you had Shri and Brian from the CPG guys as guests.
Yes.
And some other well-known people like Guru Harihan from Commerce IQ as well. Yes. So, well, first of all, congratulations on the launch and congratulations on getting some good guests to start with, which is really good because that's where you get the ball rolling better. What is the goal of the podcast?
It's actually one of those children that me and my co-host are birthing as we speak. And you're spot on. It was late last year, and thankfully for all our friends who've been generous with their time, Shri, Brian, Guru, so many more. My mentor Sharon, and it's been great to just bring them all on. Gives you a reason to reconnect, speak to them for an hour like we're doing right now, and just catch up on life and catch up on all kinds of things we're just doing in our day-to-day work. The reason why we created the podcast was because Padma, who's my co-host, is an ex-CIO, and I'm, of course, on the business marketing side. And oftentimes when we would connect, we would find that, to what we were discussing earlier, that there's a wide gap in the understanding of digital transformation to actually it happening in real life. And as we were talking about it, and we realized that, perhaps the reason for that is that the tech side and the business side don't understand each other. We have different goals. We don't have shared goals. And whilst you can have the best technology, you may spend millions of dollars getting that technology. If the business side is not understanding the why of it and is not adopting it and does not have the shared goals, the adoption lags and the change doesn't come through, right? And I think that's a big part of why digital transformations fail. So when we spoke of it and we're like, wow, there is a real white space here because not many people are talking about it, and there's a huge need for it. And between the two of us, we know enough people who can share some practical advice and challenges that come from digital transformation. So that's how we sort of started, and we started to reach out to a few of our friends, and we were kicked off by Rishad, who is a visionary as well. I really love all his points of view, and he has an amazing way of just breaking down everything into its smaller bits and pieces so then you can actually understand what is going on. Because sometimes I feel like we talk at each other a lot instead of talking to each other about what needs to get done, because everybody throws a bunch of buzzwords at each other and we think we're very smart, but actually nobody communicated a thing with each other. So we're really trying to solve for that, and is the reason why we created the podcast.
Yeah. It, as we mentioned before, it sounds like it's right on topic, or it's very, very relevant in today's world. So I'm excited to listen into the episodes that are coming up. Osh, as we just mentioned a few times already, we could sit here and talk for hours, just catching up and hearing about more about some of the things you've alluded to. But I want to be conscious of your time. And before we let you go, we do have one final question. This is a question that we ask all of our guests, which is, given everything that you've learned over this amazing career and everything that you've experienced across the many swim lanes, what would be the one piece of advice you would give yourself if you had to go back, if you could go back and talk to you at the beginning of your career as you were first going to work at Unilever in India?
Yeah, let's see. What I would tell my younger self is that there is no substitute for hard work and determination. And these days, I feel like there are so many careers you could have, and you hear about overnight success, overnight virality, overnight everything. And at least for me personally, nothing was ever overnight, and everything was hard earned. And so for me, it was, I would say that even though in this new world where everything seems like it'd be overnight success and somehow, and there's an easy way to winning, I don't believe that. I think what seems pretty easy on the outside actually still takes a lot of work. So one shouldn't be afraid of working hard and being determined about your goals and being clear about it.
This was Oshiya Savur, CMO at Maesa. Efrain, what are your beautiful takeaways from this conversation?
Well, it's one is that it's always great to connect with Osh. I've always really enjoyed my conversations with her, so it was great to have her on the pod. For me, I think it's fascinating to hear her talk about her experiences at both large corporations, so some of the true like leading brands in the FMCG space, and also the scrappy startup side of it as well, and how across all of those companies, the marketing fundamentals don't change. The scale is different, but that foundational base is critical in both ends of that spectrum.
Yeah, and how like probably reflecting on her own experience, what it takes, to go from a big corporate with the best practices, but all the structure that it has, to a more scrappy work environment. And that it's
Yeah.
definitely not for everyone, and I can be a witness of that.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, I think you know better than most, right? Is that finding somebody who can not just operate but thrive in both of those environments, the structure as well as the more scrappy side. It's
Yeah,
that's a rare combination. I think
yeah,
it's you called it the unicorn.
exactly. I mean, I would say I don't know if it's a unicorn, but it's complicated. Also about influencers, what did you think of that?
Well, I think there are a few spaces that are more fertile ground for learning about influencer marketing than beauty care, right? I mean, I think, companies like the ones that I work with definitely look to some of the companies that Osh has worked for inspiration in this space. And I think it's really interesting to hear her talk about how it's just become mission critical for companies in that space. And but what I took away from it more than anything was that not only is it able to generate a positive ROI on its own in terms
Yeah.
of like being able to drive incremental sales, but the fact that there comes an inflection point where all of a sudden your influencer marketing can also improve your ROI on paid advertising as well, or your ROAS. So that was a new thing for me. I had not heard that before.
Neither had I. And then the one thing that for me was very interesting was the AI, which ultimately, yeah, all the machine, not all the machine learnings, but a lot of machine learnings will tend to have the same idea. So where's the differentiation? No. So she talked about going back to the fundamentals and that AI can make people efficient. And I think that this is becoming consensus actually, but it doesn't replace human creativity at the end.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I think we have to remind ourselves that um, Gen AI or conversational AI is still fairly early on in its adoption curve, if you will. So I think obviously there's a lot of things that we can learn, but I think what Ash mentioned that I really found insightful was that in order for you to be able to use Gen AI effectively and to have it be really unique and a source of differentiation, you need to pair it with human intelligence as
Yeah.
well. Because like without that human intelligence and like without that more empathetic side of it, it's hard for it to be unique and differentiated.
Exactly. Well, thanks, Efrain, for your takeaways as always. Thanks to everyone for listening us, and we'll see you in the next episode of the FMCG Guys. Have a great day.